Knowledge and Information Management at the University of the Witwatersrand, with responsibilities for information and communication technology, the library system, BI, and e-learning. Third year, he had a similar role at the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town. He joined Thumbs Up in 2012 as Chief Scientist in order to pursue his interest in innovation and the business world. He's responsible for researching the opportunities, developing and implementing an API strategy for Thumbs Up products and services, knowledge management, including documentation, and responding to selected business opportunities. So with that, let me welcome Dr. Keats to talk us through the next half an hour or so on this key topic. Thank you.
Thanks. That funny little laptop, can you switch it on, please? So I'm using free and open source software to do my presentation. It's kind of unusual, despite the fact that we're in a session on free and open source software. Is there a way to get it on this monitor here? No? Okay. I'm afraid I have to keep looking around. So what I'm going to do is to have a look at governance, but I'm not really going to talk about governance frameworks. But before I get to that, this today feels very 1999-ish, because a lot of the conversations are reminiscent of the things that we talked about around free software back in the 90s. And I can't believe that in 2013 we're having the same conversations. And people are talking about the value of free and open source software without taking into consideration where we've come from as a nation, and the fact that free and open source software is first and foremost about freedom. It's about the freedom of the users to choose what they do with the software. It's also about the freedom of organizations to be able to use software technology to do what they want, as opposed to what a third party thinks they should want. And I think that we've kind of lost the plot a little bit in this, in a nation that has only recently struggled to achieve freedom, to forget about the freedom inherent in free and open source software. Political message. So, moving on. So, you know, one can think about software governance, about IT governance in many different ways, and the definition that I like is the Australian one, which I'm not going to go into any detail, but it talks about strategies and policies as well. And really it is about oversight and direction. It's about providing for accountability and making sure that there is some control of effectiveness and efficiency, and also whether to innovate or not to innovate. So there are formal frameworks for doing IT governance, one of which, the most common one probably in use in South Africa, is COBIT. There are others. I'm not going to go into them. Some of you have heard me speak before, and I'm going to probably sound a little bit like a broken record going round and round in terms of what I say. The FOSS policy has been talked about already this morning, but I just want to review the 5 key elements of it, which is that we should use FOSS, we should migrate to FOSS, we should develop in FOSS, we should use FOSS licenses, and we should promote FOSS. How many people here are CIOs? How many people here do all 5 of those? Interesting. So when I talk about free and open source software, a lot of the conversation has been about implementing technology. It's been about software in a box. You get the box and you install it and you operate it. But to really, for a large organization to leverage the potential of free and open source software, there's a number of layers that you can go through, starting with number 1 at the top there, which is using existing, coming all the way down to creating your own projects, creating and running your own projects. And for maximum value, a large organization like government needs to be operating across all of those, either directly or through its partnership with organizations like CETA and so on. Otherwise, the real power of free and open source software is not being leveraged. Now, government, like most large organizations, are complex systems with lots of emergent properties, and it is very difficult in any large organization to determine both direction and magnitude. And so one has to look at these large ecosystems from an ecological point of view. I don't know if you can see it, but it says ecological behind the box there. And so what I try to do is I try to imagine how to take an ecosystem in its current state and change it to another state by looking at these 5 things. Vision. I mean, everybody who does technology knows about people, process, and technology. I'm not sure that everybody knows more than just the words, though, because I see a lot of cases where people talk about it but don't do it. But these are sandwiched in between vision. There has to be a vision. What is it? Where is it you want to go? What is it you want to achieve? And sustainable finance. And just to give you an example of that, here we see vision, people, process, technology underpinned by sustainable finance. And governance sits in the process box, and it's one out of many processes, of which there are only examples given here. So governance by itself doesn't solve anything. But governance is an important process within this whole ecosystem of processes, and it is tightly linked and coupled to vision, because you can't govern something if you don't know what it's supposed to look like, and also to strategy, and strategy is one of the elements of the vision box in this model. So let's look at things that are in this vision box where one should really be starting when one is trying to create change in an ecosystem, and when one is trying to implement governance within that system. So the question is, to what extent is there governance around the FOSS policy? So this is all specifically related to the FOSS policy, but you could apply it to other things as well. So what would you have if you had strong governance? A committee reporting to the highest level governance structure and features FOSS on its agenda. There is FOSS forms a strong component of the highest level of IT governance. There's independent IT knowledge within the governance structure with a focus on FOSS. There's an implementation of policy with respect to FOSS, and it's audited, and the audit is taken seriously. We heard this morning, I think, that that's not the case. A strategy exists and serves as the basis for estimating value of achievements with respect to FOSS in this case. There are regular reports with score sheets that are received, and those are measured against strategic goals, and there's a formalized governance framework. Now, if we take the current scenario with respect to FOSS, the last one says an accountable person who's held accountable by virtue of key performance indicators and so on. You'll see that if you imagine now that we can look at each of those things in terms of how mature are we. So building on the old COBIT 4, adapting from the old COBIT 4 maturity model, 0 from non-existent to 5 optimized. Very few people will go to 5 being optimized. You probably will be somewhere in between. I can sort of theorize as to where we are in respect to the FOSS strategy, and you can see that the highest one is that there is, I'm assuming that GTOC plays that role. If I'm wrong, then one of the lines gets shorter, but you can see that we aren't exactly governing this policy. And so can we really expect that a lot is going to happen if it is not adequately governed? So maybe we think about some interventions that can be made in relation to these criteria around governance. We make those interventions and we look again and we see that hypothetically we have progressed. We're moving towards the yellow line, the target, and progress has been made. What in fact we are seeing is this little original kite diagram that I showed here has been sitting there in the middle since the policy was actually promulgated, and we haven't been governing it, so we haven't been making progress. Now, if we look at it from the perspective of vision, now vision's good to have a vision written down, but writing it down is not enough, is it? So, to what extent do we have a vision? Does the vision exist? Is it used to? Is it derived from or drives policy or legislation? Does it articulate well with other policies? Is it clear and easy to understand? Can all the stakeholders explain it? Can everybody in this room explain the FOSS policy? I doubt it. Is the vision document easily available? Are there videos? Are there other media that help explain it, that socialize it, get it into the organization? Is the vision well socialized? Is it on agendas? Is it discussed? Does it inform strategies and operational plans? Is there widespread acceptance of the responsibility for the vision among all of the critical stakeholders, including all of you CIOs? Does the vision focus on the role of FOSS in helping government achieve its core objectives? Because FOSS for FOSS is great. It has the connotation of freedom, but given that it's also got the connotation of technology, it's not enough for it just to be there. It's got to actually help achieve the core objectives. And does it draw attention to the need for, what does that say? I can't even read it myself. Oh yeah, the need for excellence. And so if we do the same exercise, we give them a letter, we assign them a number, we see that the current state looks something like that. So we're not governing FOSS. We don't have a very articulate vision that is well socialized and well understood. Now let's look at the other piece of this, which is strategy. And you would think that the policy itself and the documents derived from it constitute a strategy. Let's have a look. Does a strategy exist for bringing FOSS to bear on government ICT processes? Does the strategy give life to the vision statement? Is the strategy derived from broader government strategy or embedded within it? Is the strategy specific, measurable, aggressive, realistic, and time-bound, smart? And was there active participation of stakeholders? It's so long ago now that everybody's forgotten, so unless Aslam is here to remind us, probably there's not many people around who know the answer to that. Is it known and socialized? How often do you have a conversation about how wonderful the FOSS strategy is? They do it in Brazil. Why don't we do it in South Africa? Is it used for decision making? Actually, it's probably more used not to make decisions than it is to make decisions. Is it owned by all of the IT leaders? In other words, the CIOs, anybody who is remotely considered an IT leader in the organization? Again, we can do the same exercise and we come up with something that looks like this. So we not governing FOSS. We don't really have much of a vision for FOSS, and we don't really have a FOSS strategy. And so how can we apply IT governance to something which is not at the state where it's actually ready to be governed? So the first step would have to be to fill those gaps. So if we look at strategy, I think everybody knows what a strategy is, but sometimes it's worth defining it. It should articulate the vision, and it should have aims, objectives, and goals, in which aims are very high-level things that need to be done. So in the FOSS policy, the South African government will implement FOSS unless proprietary software is demonstrated to be significantly superior. That's an aim. And you can't measure that. Objectives are more further down the chain, targets that you can achieve. So drawing out of that, an objective might be create project governance with government-wide oversight that ensures projects implemented within all spheres of government would have to justify the implementation of proprietary software, and ensures that FOSS client applications are not disadvantaged even where proprietary software is implemented. So I, as a taxpayer of this country, for example, as a corporate taxpayer of this country, am behind in my taxes because the bloomin' interface system that SARS uses is not compatible with my free and open source software. Create broad improvements to procurement so that FOSS is recognized and favored. As it stands at the moment, and the first conversation I had about this was just over 3 years ago now, and it doesn't seem like any progress has been made in that. That the procurement system just doesn't quite work for FOSS. Okay, and lots of other things as well. So goals, then take those things and unpack them down to the level of something that you can actually measure. And I say everybody knows what SMART goals are: specific, measurable. I use the word aggressive here rather than achievable, because when we are dealing with a policy that is already 6 years, 7 years old, if we aren't aggressive, then we should put it in a suitcase and put a rock in a suitcase and sink it at sea somewhere. We've got to be aggressive if this is going to work. So we can then take this vision, strategy, aims, objectives, and goals and unpack them into a level of detail. And once you've done that, now you can actually govern. Because if you don't have this, how does the governance structure know what it is going to measure? So you can take COBIT, or you can take any of these other frameworks, and you can apply them, but without taking it from the perspective of the way in which governance has to work, it's not actually going to be solving the problem. So if we look at this from the perspective of the three critical areas that are necessary in order for governance to be applied, we're doing rather poorly on all of them. Maybe the strategy is slightly better because so much of it is spelled out in the policy document and implementation plan that was never actually effective. So if you don't have governance, what happens? If you don't have governance, what you have is you have a system that is largely ad hoc. Great things might happen. Terrible things might happen. It will be ad hoc. You have a system which is totally dependent on the passion of individuals. And we've seen what the passion of individuals can do in the example from Limpopo. We see a lot of passion of individuals in the Department of Arts and Culture, and maybe there's a few other places where the passion of individuals drive really interesting implementations of the policy, but it's ad hoc. You see what happens is people follow the path of least resistance. I liken it to, you're sitting in a bathtub full of really unspeakable stuff. You know you need to get out of the bathtub, but it's just so comfortable you stay there. And that's the scenario we are in. I think we follow the path of least resistance. Then FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, abound in the system, and often is the reason for making decisions rather than any kind of indication of the truth. And I've heard a lot of FUD here this today and yesterday, an enormous amount of FUD, just simply wrong things, wrong perceptions, presented sometimes as if they were true. You end up in a win and lose cycle where sometimes you implement FOSS and you win, sometimes you implement it and you lose, and terrible things happen. It's not you're not in a predictable environment. So what you have is you have fluctuating value. You gain some benefit, you lose some benefit. You gain some benefit, you lose some benefit. Why? Because it's not managed, it's not governed. And so when the policy started in 2007. This kind of was the situation. When I first got involved in 2011, this was the situation, and here we are in 2013 having pretty much exactly the same conversation we had in 2011, and I imagine going back further than that as well. So coming back to this, one of the key components in the process box as well, which links across, maybe you could put it in the people box, is leadership. And leadership makes a big difference. And I am not talking about leadership in the sense that you have a president who makes a decision. I'm talking about leadership, human leadership. And leadership has two angles. There's the leadership that comes from the top, and there's a leadership that comes from the bottom. And you might lynch me for saying this now, but I'm going to say it anyway, because nobody else is saying it. And someone has to say it. And that is that in this government environment, the CIOs are the people who are responsible and accountable for implementing policy with respect to information and communications technologies. Not so. Yet everyone, universally, for the 3 years that I've been engaging with government CIOs through GTalk and various other fora, the conversations have always been the same. People are waiting for someone else to do something. Sitting comfortably with your iPads, proprietary technology, with your Windows machines, proprietary technology. DPSA sending out templates for presentation on FOSS, not only in proprietary technology, but using proprietary fonts that I can't use, which is why my laptop's at the back at the moment, because I don't have the fonts on to use those proprietary fonts. And nothing has happened. Whatever became of the notion introduced by Gandhi and popularized quite well by our first democratically elected president, be the change you want to see in the world. Why must everyone wait for someone else to make the decision? When I became a executive director for knowledge and information management at the University of the Western Cape, and I was convinced that we needed to do free and open source software. I was a Windows user. I programmed in Windows. Everything that I did in Windows. I realized that the only way for me to effect change was to become the change that I wanted to see. So I was the first person to actually make the switch. What I see is a lot of people waiting for someone else to do it, waiting for someone else to be first, waiting for someone else to take the leadership, when the solution to the leadership, I think, sits in this room. You may not find it may not be perfect. There may be a need that we still have to tackle things from other angles. But ultimately, this is not going to work. The FOSS policy is not going to work unless there is not just buy-in but commitment from the CIOs. And that has to be the change you want to see in the world. If you take the ecological view, all of these challenges that I see people raising as reasons not to do something, you're not meant to read this, by the way. You can unpack all of those. You can unpack all of them into one of those 5 areas of vision, people, process, technology, and sustainable finance. You can map each one of them back to one of those areas. You can map some of them as cross-links to other areas, but each and every one of them can be listed and something can be put in place to solve that particular challenge. But one has to actually be willing to go the distance and start building a model of your environment so that you can actually take the steps necessary in order to make this FOSS policy succeed and to govern it so that it continues succeeding in helping the country achieve its goals. And some of those goals are going to be things that have to do with intellectual, what I call intellectual capital. You know, when you buy proprietary software, you're exporting your intellectual capital. In the proprietary software world, the bulk of the technologies that you're buying are going to be manufactured in another country. Isn't it? So the intellectual capital, the minds, the ideas that went into that software are minds and ideas that come from where that software was written. Whereas with free and open source software, you can take your own intellectual capital and you can apply it to the software technologies that you need locally. Grow local industries and contribute to freedom in the digital age. Otherwise, maybe we can just wait, don't change anything at all, and wait and see if something magical happens. And this presentation was made entirely using free software and presented using free software.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
We've got time for questions.
Thank you very much, Colin. So, a couple things to summarize. I like the acronym on FOSS, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. I think the topic of IT governance is just one that's meant to address that. If I can summarize